When people think of the origin of the gay rights movement, they often start with Stonewall. Although the Stonewall riot played an undoubtedly significant role in the formation of gay politics and identity, the anti-war struggle of the 1960s and 70s set the stage for the development of a distinctly gay political consciousness. The Vietnam War sent troops abroad, but it also brought a new battle for gay liberation to the forefront of American life. Vietnam transformed how a generation of lesbian and gay Americans thought about power, identity, and solidarity, illustrated by anti-war protest and organizing. For some World War II and Korean War veterans, the experience of serving in the military as a gay person in the 1950s catalyzed the formation of homophile organizations. The homophile groups were discrete organizations established to free homosexuals from humiliating forms of discrimination, integrate homosexuals into American society. Homophile groups like the Mattachine Society, the Daughters of Bilitis, and the Society for Individual Rights were opposed to discrimination against gay service members. They advocated for the integration of homosexuals into the armed services, and they saw the threat of less than honorable discharges as socially and economically disastrous for the community. Homophile organizations staged protests that followed the politics of respectability established by early African American civil rights groups, like protesting in suits and skirts because they wanted to assert their ability to successfully integrate into American society. They were fighting for dignity and visibility against a country that wanted to typecast them as deviant. At the National Planning Conference of Homophile Organizations in 1966, the delegates agreed to raise military integration to the top of their national agenda. Speakers at the protest were critical of the Department of Defense for not allowing homosexuals to openly serve in the military, but failed to assert any sort of condemnation of U.S. military intervention. Their careful and apolitical approach lacked appeal for the youth coming of age in the 1960s that faced new challenges like the Vietnam draft. The Vietnam War draft was a seminal moment in the lives of young gay men. In the medical survey, all draftees were required to answer, "Have you ever had or have you now homosexual tendencies?" Young men were faced with two unfavorable options. Checking yes would disqualify them from military or civil service, their name would go on record with the FBI, and they may be forced to come out to their friends and families as well. However, checking no would be a violation of federal law, risking fine or imprisonment if found out, and not to mention the risk of dying in service. The draft was a no-win situation for gay youth. It had the unexpected effect of politicizing a generation of queer people. One could literally and metaphorically come out against the war by asserting a homosexual identity that was becoming increasingly constructed by the idea of liberation. Before Stonewall, gay men were already organizing anti-war protests, and the riots there gave new wind to the anti-war struggle. For some, the struggle of developing countries against American imperialism mirrored the struggle of gay people domestically. Jim Rankin famously wrote, "We gay, powerless males must of necessity of our condition be anti-war and anti-imperialist. We are already a conquered territory." Gay liberation groups like the Gay Liberation Front and the Radical Lesbians employed increasingly militant forms of organizing and protest against Vietnam and the oppression of homosexuals, seeing the struggles as part and parcel of the repressive American government. The Gay Liberation Front rejected the idea that being allowed to serve in the military was any indicator of equality. Why fight for the right to die in a war that you oppose? Although radical anti-war organizations were emerging in the gay community, homophile organizations clung to their apolitical stance on Vietnam out of fear that they would alienate contingents of their members. Soon, the homophile organizations were revered as ineffective and archaic by liberationists. The Gay Liberation Theater staged a protest with musician Don Burton at a Society of Individual Rights meeting, which resulted in a crowd on the street burning their SIR membership cards, similar to how other opposed young men would burn their draft cards. These young activists took to the streets to show up for anti-war demonstrations across the country. The April 24, 1971 anti-war demonstration in Washington, D.C. had a large contingent of Gay Liberation Front members. The Gay Liberation Front organized to bring people to the march by securing transportation, accommodation, and distributing informational materials. The Vietnam War ignited a new political consciousness for gay people in the United States that framed their struggles for inequality within a larger framework that was deeply critical of U.S. militarism and imperialism. This radical identity diverged from the respectability politics of earlier organizations and found welcome company alongside certain contingents of the Black and women's liberation movements as well.
Like a wave rolling across America, the changes came. Sometimes surprising, often shocking. By 1970, the passions of the 60s were being channeled into a social revolution, more widespread than anyone could have imagined a decade earlier.
In 1969, in New York City, there was a riot that took place. The police routinely raided the bars in New York. No big deal. It happened all the time. At the end of June of 1969, for a number of reasons, the patrons fought back, and there was a riot that lasted for 3 days. But shortly thereafter, a call went out that a new organization was formed called the Gay Liberation Front. And the name, of course, was modeled after the Vietnamese Liberation Front, those words. And I think really was inspired by the rise of the Black movement, or there were the examples on the media day after day of Black people rising up and fighting back. There were riots in Harlem. It was an image that was in the air all the time, the image of the anti-war protesters, and of course women were writing articles about feminism. All of these images were reinforcing. And the reinforced message was, it's right to rebel.
The divide between the liberal homophiles and the radical Gay Liberation Front was illustrated in 1975 when an Air Force Sergeant, Leonard Matlovich, came out to his superior officer in defiance of the military's continued ban on homosexual service members. Matlovich was a pivotal figure in popularizing the conversation and experience of gay people serving in the military. He appeared on the cover of Time magazine in his Air Force uniform with the title, "I Am a Homosexual, The Gay Drive for Acceptance." He had minimal support in gay liberation circles because of his proud service in Vietnam. Homophile politics fought for dignity of gay soldiers like Matlovich. The gay liberation was more attuned to an agenda for a world without war and without the systems that enabled both global and domestic oppression. Queer liberation came out of the unique experiences of the Vietnam War. The conflict resulted in a convergence of identity and resistance that was a revelation for young queer activists. Coming out was political. Being queer was no longer personal and discreet, but it could be part of a larger revolutionary movement. Homosexuals continue to be banned from military service under the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy that was enacted in 1993 and remained in place until 2011. The experiences of queer people in the United States during Vietnam illuminates two important aspects of queer history. The Vietnam War changed the way gay people conceptualized their identity, and it also increased their organizational capacity to advance their civil rights in the forthcoming decades.